You're listening to the Culturing Podcast. That's Culture EING, where we believe that healthy company culture is the untapped fuel to growth in your organization. By taking action today on building an amazing workplace environment, you're setting yourself up for an unstoppable, thriving future that will put you on the map and propel you to prosperity. This is your host, Thane Allen. So come on, let's get culturing. Have you ever wondered whose responsibility it is to create, to pioneer, to build your company culture? Well, today we're putting a little bit of the onus back onto everyone. We're saying that it's not one person's responsibility, but it's a joint responsibility. We all share in some accountability to building awesome workplaces. And so my guest today, Thane Marcus Rigler, is going to talk about this. He is coming at it from a millennial perspective. He has recently written a book, From Here to There, and he talks about sort of what does personal mastery look like. And so we're going to apply some of the things that he's learned on his journey of personal mastery and personal growth and development and put it onto companies, put it onto our role in culture. And each of us, whether we are just started at a company yesterday or we are the CEO, we all have a part to play in contributing to building our culture. And so it's been really awesome to even just chat offline with Thane about this, but he's bringing some really unique perspectives on what this looks like and what we can really do, all of us, to bring our best selves to work, to really focus internally on our own development and how that can really make an impact in our organization. I'm here today with Thane Marcus Rigler, and I'm just excited about it because seriously, this guy is taking the world by storm. So welcome to the Culturing Podcast.
Thanks so much, Thane, and I'm excited to be here. And I was a little nervous about the name because it's such a unique, awesome name. So I'm always worried I'm going to enunciate it wrong and, people are going to be offended. I'm like, man, this is great. But Thane Allen, I love that, like Thane Marcus. We kind of share some similarities there with the first and middle names.
I know. I mean, some people always wonder, who am I? Why do I think I'm so awesome that I should change my name? But it's basically just to help other people.
Yes, I know. How can we make this easier for everyone else?
So why I wanted to bring you on the podcast today was because you're offering such a unique perspective. You've recently written a book, From Here to There, and it's incredible and getting a lot of traction. How are you finding it to be a great experience, and what's been the response so far?
Yeah, well, thank you. It has been an amazing journey. Definitely not filled with all fairy tales and roses for sure, but that's like any journey in life. It has been fun. I was able to get a couple bestseller titles on Amazon, which is cool. And really, I came from nothing in the sense of no past really writing exposure and a smaller platform to launch off of. So it was kind of starting from scratch, and to be able to really hustle and push the book out well and to have a product that I can stand by and that I'm proud to sell has been a really fulfilling experience, and definitely a long journey, a couple years in the making. But to kind of go through that journey and come out the other side with something I'm proud of and that other people are benefiting from is one of the greatest joys and one of the most fulfilling processes I've been a part of.
Well, and that's what I want to talk about, is that you're releasing it. There's no question why this is happening, because you're releasing content in something people are craving. You're talking about personal development. And that word, although I'm not a fan of it because it can mean so many different things, yes, but the specific parts that you're talking about are so important. And you're talking about things like mastery and commitment and learning. And, what does it look like to be someone that takes control of their own life, takes back control of their own life even perhaps, and really makes themselves better. And so why I wanted to bring you on, as we talk about on this podcast, company culture, is I really want you, Thane, to just speak about what does it look like for somebody to really take personal development and apply it to their life in a role at work and their company and being a contributor to that company's culture.
Massive. It's such an important topic. So I'm glad we get to chat about it, because at the end of the day, you're right. Development is a universal process that we're all in. We're all moving from point A to point B, whether it be in a trajectory or whether it be within ourselves as we grow through life. And so development is an innate part of our experience in life. And so we have to recognize it as such. And really, if we don't recognize it as such, then what naturally happens is the second law of thermodynamics, which is entropy, right? We're going to start decaying. Everything slowly fades away, and decay is such as the second law, right? If there's not enough force and opposition against it. So that's what settling is. Settling is a natural reality that if we don't have intention against settling, we will settle because we're lazy inherently. So it takes intention. And I think the point that you make with company culture is that when you're a part of a larger unit, it's easier to settle. And I think that's one of the core reasons that makes it really hard is that when you're a part of a large entity, then you get lost in the numbers and the faces and you have less of a direct effect. And so it's easier to take the easier path, to settle for less than you're capable of. And that's a temptation for everyone. But so for where I'm at and where I was in golf and where I am now in self-employment, it is a little bit of a different experience because it forces you to take 100% ownership. You have no other option. I can't say like, oh man, I just didn't win that tournament because this person did this or this condition was X or Y or Z. Like everything falls on my shoulders. And so it forces you to do what you don't want to do. But over time, you learn to love taking that ownership because you know it produces your best results for the good and betterment of either the company, the society at large, or the world at large. And so I think that if we can understand that our natural response is to settle and then it takes intention to act in opposition to that, that's the first step always, just recognizing that reality.
And so speak to me as if I am a person that's working in this large organization and I'm feeling stuck. I'm feeling like I am that person that has settled and I don't want to be anymore. How do I sort of pick myself up out of that? And then maybe even after that, touch on what can managers, leaders, and executives do to also encourage and inspire people to get out of that sort of coasting mindset?
Yes, 100%. So for the person that is coasting, right, it's first recognizing where you're at, being honest with yourself, being as objective as possible, having other people and other perspectives help fuel or inform that, and just really being real, right? Recognizing reality. And then you get to say, okay, what would it look like if I did take ownership? Who would I be if I really leaned into this role and embraced it and went beyond my personal capacity right now. And then the most important follow-up after that though is why? Why should I? Why will I? Why does this matter? And why should I take ownership? Because if you don't start with why, as a lot of people talk about, right, your reason, your purpose for doing what you're doing, it won't last. That's what produces the endurance with it, because it takes patience and persistence to change habits and to turn bad habits into new good habits. And it takes a lot of work. And the only way you have the ability to endure all the obstacles of changing those realities is if you have a compelling enough reason why. And so I really encourage people to say, okay, what are you trying to accomplish with your life? What are you actually pushing towards? And who are you? My big question is, who are you created, equipped, and called to be? Because if you can answer that question, or at least come up with some semblance of a reality for that now, it will change. It will shift throughout all of our lives. That's growth, right? That's how I start the book out with a quote from Muhammad Ali that says, the man who views his life the same at 50 as he did at 20 wasted 30 years of his life.
Wow.
And that's the reality. Like if we aren't changing our perspective, the older we get, we're not growing. We're stagnant, and that's not a place you want to be. And so for the people that are in companies, it's really being real with yourself, recognizing where you're at, saying how it is, and then thinking about what would it be if it looked like, what would it look like if it was different? And why should I make that gap between where I am and where I want to be? Why should I eliminate that gap and make who I want to be who I actually am? From the overseer, the manager side, management's hard because ultimately it's people, right? You're dealing with people, and we're complicated human beings that have a mess of emotions and desires and realities that just make this a beautiful dance. But dancing can sometimes be frustrating. So the job of a manager is really, and I have a couple roles where I'm managing people now with a young adults group ministry I lead, and with the podcast I do, and so it's really figuring out, like, clearly, how can I understand this person? How can I understand what motivates them, what their desires are, and how can I then empower them into those realities? Because if I can help them be empowered, then they can help me further the goal and the mission of what we're trying to do, and make sure that those are aligned, because alignment is what produces the efficiency and this effectiveness moving forward. And that's really, in my perspective, the task always of a manager is how can we align ourselves with the people below us and then align them with the vision of the company at large.
I love that, because what often I hear in my work is leaders' frustration. You have a lot of people, a lot of leaders, a lot of executive teams who are trying. They're out there trying to be better leaders, and they're out there trying to make awesome workplace cultures. And where they get frustrated is that they say, the people alongside me, the people on my team, they're not coming with me. I'm on the boat, but they're not on the boat. So I'm on the bus, but they're not on the bus, kind of thing. And I think you just nailed it there, that sometimes it's actually just about knowing that the people that are on your team, maybe just knowing them, period. Maybe you don't even know who they are and what their goals are and what they're excited about or what excites them. And so until you can actually, get off your high horse and take a little bit more time and say, I'm actually going to take the time to get to know these people, that's when you can then bring it back to the alignment of where you want to go as a leader, and then they'll be on the bus and the boat with you, right?
100%. I mean, there's fears on both sides, and I think that's an important thing to realize, right? Like the fear from the manager side, and we're all on this boat, right? In some capacity, is that if you invest all that time and energy into this person or that person, and they end up leaving, moving on, or having to move, being forced to move on because they can't fulfill the role, then that's a waste, right? And on some sense, it is. But on another sense, it isn't, because you're not only getting better at being an effective communicator and teacher and empowerer, but you're also learning what to do by learning what not to do in a lot of ways, and learning who is or who isn't the right fit. You'd rather have someone who isn't the right fit not be there than be there. So that's a refinement process. It's just hard to believe those truths in the moment. It's preaching that truth and then believing it, which means you're taking action on it. And it's always the harder path. So
you spend a lot of your time researching and dedicating yourself to the personal development space. You're understanding this in a deeper way than probably most of us do. And I'd like you to just take us into some of that research. I'm curious about what you are seeing in the employee world from a personal development movement. So, one thing that I would love if you could talk about is sort of people transitioning into self-employment to varying degrees while they're still at work. And then I'd also love to hear about who are the real stars in corporations these days and what is different about them, even from how they've personally developed versus their, maybe less successful or less, pioneering counterpart.
Totally. Yeah. So on the first side, I think that I actually just posted a blog post about this whole self-employment versus traditional employment, because we do see a trend of what seems like way more people moving into self-employment. Right. The reality isn't quite as stark as we get the sense or feel of. You always hear about momentum and the loudest voices, but that doesn't mean that's the most voices.
For sure.
I think that, more than ever before, people have the opportunity to be self-employed, but I think most people are just going in the middle gap area, which is the gig kind of side, the gig economy of partial self-employment, supplementing their traditional income, which is awesome. I mean, the way that technologies and new companies are allowing us to capitalize on already existing parts of our life is really cool. Airbnb, Uber, all these other companies doing amazing work. And it's awesome that we can start providing cheaper service for people and then also earning some income from that. So that's a great thing. So I think that part of the motivation for people who are employed traditionally is one, it gives them more empowerment to earn something on their own and maybe build towards other goals. But two, it may be like a facilitator of that why or that vision that they aren't getting at their work. So it may be showing a lack of that fulfillment at their current job. That could be part of it. But I think at the end of the day, I think it is really understanding that the grass is not always greener on the other side of the fence. And when you hear and see of a lot more noise and talk about people becoming their own bosses, we get this fantasaical, like a view of being self-employed. And it's really not a fantasy. It's just as, it has its own set of challenges and problems just as much as being traditionally employed. They're just different. And so for people to really evaluate and recognize the trade-offs is really important in making that shift or transition. Otherwise, you'll likely get blindsided and end up wasting those, not wasting, but not having it be what you'd set out for it to be. So I think that's the first thing to note.
Yeah. Can I just pause you there? Because I love what you're saying. And to me, what I'm hearing out of that is that perhaps leaders don't need to be as afraid of those in their company that are maybe circling around the drain of leaving and kind of like going into that self-employment avenue. And so would you say, to the leaders that are listening, that they shouldn't be as afraid of it, and that they actually might even, you might even encourage them to let people test it out? Like, what would you say to a leader that has somebody that they're leading that, does want to start their own company? And I know a lot of leaders fear that. A lot of leaders fear their best talent leaving. But you might say something different to them. What is that?
Well, it's a difficult thing, right? Because you really want to protect your assets and the people that are really making a difference in your company, because any company is made of people ultimately. So that's really an important part of your business. But I think that the reality is, if you don't have that conversation, then you will lose them because you aren't recognizing their needs and wants and desires, because they're coming out in their actions, right? The actions kind of show that they're either not being fulfilled, or they're not finding what they want in their current role, or they think that something is better. So yeah, I think the encouragement is, have that conversation, talk to them, like really get to know them, really get to know why and what they're looking for, and why it's not being provided in their current role, or how it could be provided. Because we always think in this model of either or, but it's almost always better to think of both and, right? Like, how can we make this a win-win, right? Not instead of this or that, how can it be both and?
Yeah.
And so I think there's always more solutions in that middle ground, but it always takes having that conversation and not viewing it as something you fear, but as an opportunity. I mean, that's a huge part, right? Is like, I don't want to run away or fight or flight. I want to have a conversation and become friends with this and sit in the discomfort of this and just be honest and real with each other. And all of these are very complex issues, right? So, I mean,
Definitely.
we're talking in generalizations, and I'm definitely by no means the expert or an expert on this, but I think that if we can just think about it as starting conversations, being honest, and seeing how we can solve the problem of people not being motivated, not being fulfilled in their current work, and what the solutions for that, or coming together and finding a solution for that, could be a really one. I mean, that going through conflict really produces stronger bonds, or it separates, right? And both of those are a good thing a lot of times. So
yeah, and you even talk about, if I'm not mistaken, in your book, about teachability. And what I love in that concept is that usually it's a very personal thing, right? You have to tell yourself to be teachable. No one really can force it on you. But maybe even you can flip it to the leader and say, what might you even be able to be taught by your employee, that they could help you understand why they're looking on the outside for other work, or a new opportunity to start their own company or be self-employed. Maybe it's that both employees and kind of normal people versus executives and leaders, we all have to be teachable, and we can learn from not just people above us, but also people below us.
100%. Yeah. One of my favorite chapters on this is actually from Jocko Willink's book, Extreme Ownership. He has a chapter all about leading up the chain of command. So on both ways, like if you're an employee listening and you're frustrated with maybe how your superior is handling things, like your job and your role and your challenge is to lead him through your example and through your actions and the way you influence upward, just as much as his is leading downward. And so it works both ways in that. And I think that's a really empowering place for those people that do feel that there's things that could be improved on. Then you get to be strategic on how to produce or promote that change in a way that's beneficial for both above and below. And it's a challenging thing. Like, that's a really hard concept, but I would say that's a great resource for people to read, to get an idea of that if you're on the flip side of what you just mentioned. But I think too, like the other way for managers or leaders to view their role is to separate the job from the business itself and think about it on a human level, right? Because if you think about it as what is the reality of this, well, it's that we're both human beings, and my role, even as a manager, isn't just related to business, it's related to being a human. And how can I help this human be a better human, right? And how can we both grow in this? And that's part of leadership, is just saying, look, like beyond this job, beyond the money, beyond the performance and results, like I care about you as a person. And here's some things that could be really helpful for you growing as a person. And that could create such a stronger bond as well. I mean, it's a more challenging personal place to be, but it's also can be a more rewarding place as well.
That's amazing. Another thing that I love that you are quite a fan of, and I think you're helping a lot of people with this, is is systems, personal life systems. But a lot of the time, especially when you feel in your company and your job that the systems that are there and before you and that you have to use every day, you can't control. I'm curious what you might even say to somebody that says that, and what might be some examples of systems that they could use to incorporate in their life to grow and to personally develop, that regardless of whatever systems your business has, you can still grow with, blank systems. What are the ones that you are really finding people are resonating with?
Totally. I think it's huge, man. I mean, life is already chaotic enough. So the more that we can have structure for the chaos, the better we can operate within it. And, I think, again, Jocko has some great stuff on discipline equaling freedom. And that's the truth. The reality of it is that discipline is what unlocks our ability to be free within that structure. And if you think even artistically, you can't create if there's not a space to create within. And so you have to have structure for which that creation can happen. That's the beauty of it. So it unlocks our abilities instead of binding it. We think about it kind of the wrong way a lot of times. So systems are massive. I think the systems that anyone can implement are around two things, I think. Would be the daily disciplines, and the second would be self-awareness. And I think both of those can be done by anyone, anywhere, and are massively important to wherever you find yourself on the employment to self-employment spectrum. So the daily disciplines, I think just baseline, most fundamental cornerstone is morning and evening routines. Because if you can bookend your day by starting it consistently in your benefit for your favor, it'll produce a lot more consistency within those bookends as well. And so having a very intentional way to start and end your day will produce better results within your day. And that's just universally true. And so I love helping people in working through those and what's best for them. And it is an experimentation process. You have to really taste and see what is good and what isn't, and what helps for you and what works for you and what doesn't. And so it's a process.
The Bible quote there.
Yeah. Yes. I know. Right. It's so true. Like God, it's so cool because God infuses so much truth and wisdom that we all experience and know in life in the scripture. And it's just amazing. So that's the power of personal experience. But on the other side, that self-awareness side, I think that if people can start growing in self-awareness, that's what's enabling them and empowering them to be able to self-correct. There's a great quote by Chris Quartz, who was an Enneagram guy, and he said that if you can't self-observe, you can't self-correct. So self-observation is always the thing that precedes your ability to guide yourself well. And so developing systems or putting structures in place to help you grow in self-awareness can be a massive, massive benefit.
And this is stuff that if you don't lock into this sooner than later, this is where frustration happens. This is where the promotion can get unlocked that you've been waiting for. This is where that conversation with your boss that you're afraid of can go way better than you think it might go. Or the conversation that you need to have with your employee that you're leading, it can go way better when you have something consistent in your life, when you know you're going to be on point on a regular basis, when your mind is more clear, when you are taking care of yourself, but really when you're self-aware, right? Really when you've taken it into your own initiative to become self-aware, it becomes something that trickles down as a positive effect to everybody that you work with, to everyone that you lead, to everything that you do in your job, is that you can already be self-corrective, and you don't have to have as many of those really hard to have conversations with a leader that's like, hey, you need to fix this, or hey, I'm noticing this about you. You've already self-diagnosed, you've already figured it out, and you're already working on it. And they're going to be like, wow, I noticed it in them. They were self-aware enough that I can trust them with something greater, right? And it's that thing of, again, Bible quoting, it's those who are trusted with little will be trusted with much. So What does that look like in the workplace? Well, it looks like being self-aware. That's really good.
Yeah. And it does, like, I think the point you just highlighted is it doesn't happen by chance. You have to have intention and focus on making it happen, because everything in our world is trying to accomplish the opposite, if we're honest, right? The information overload, the barrage of pricking our desires and our needs and our wants through advertising and marketing is only getting better, and we're only getting more and more distracted. And so the way to do this is you have to set the intention, and you have to really push past the natural obstacles that are constantly coming, the noise that's constantly coming from the world we live in. And it takes discipline to do that. And I think it's like, it's something that we grow in, though. That's so encouraging. And again, I think the thing that's really important to highlight is that it doesn't necessarily eliminate those conversations like you're talking about. It helps us be better equipped for them, and so that we are able to do them more effectively and more successfully on both sides. So it's not saying that, hey, all your problems will go away when you're self-aware. It's saying that, look, you're going to be way more equipped and way more better able to handle whatever comes your way, because you know how you operate, you know how you respond, and you know how you can get yourself to respond the way you want yourself to, proactive.
Correct. That's incredible. So one thing that obviously, being someone who's been a high level athlete for a lot of their life, health is really important. And you're knowing now, as you become more of a expert on the topic of personal development, that health is such a cornerstone of that as well. But I also want you to share, what is it like for somebody who health hasn't been a major component of their life forever? It's somewhat of a stumbling block for them. They've tried and tried and tried, and it's just not been easy, as it might have been for you. Although I'm not trying to discredit that you have discipline and all these things, but it's come a bit more naturally to someone that's been an athlete forever. But I think everyone is capable of becoming healthier and doing something, even if it's something small. Again, in your research and your work to understand how to personally develop, what are you saying to people who this is something new, this health thing, and where can they start, and how, why do they need to really be healthy to personally develop?
Yeah, it's huge. And I think I would like to preface everything with a quote that I say a lot from, I think Bill Simon said that I was born on third base and thought I hit a triple. And so, and so you're right. Like, I was born on third base, and I can't claim that I hit that triple. I had genes that were favorable for, healthy results. And I also had a life that promoted it, and a family that helped support it, and a career that ended up facilitating it. So all those things I can't take full ownership of. Like, those were given to me in a lot of ways. So what I do with them, that's my stewardship, and that's my responsibility. So the point of all that is to say that, like you said, that personal mastery and personal development is just that. It's personal. It's pursuing mastery for you, and that will look different than mastery for someone else, because we're all unique. We're all different. Literally no two humans are the same. Even twins are different, right? So, so I think it's really important to understand that what is true for others isn't necessarily true for you in the specifics, but in the general truth, it can be and likely is. So when people are, I think that first off is just understanding that, again, health doesn't happen by chance, and we have to have intention around it. But the fact that we maybe feel fine doesn't mean that we're living optimally, because the real reality is that no one really, unless you're a professional athlete and that's your job, is to strive towards optimization of everything. It's not practical to be optimal. I do think that there is a threshold that is practical. So now that I've switched out of professional sports into different careers, I've shifted my mindset on that because I've had to. And for me, I think it's somewhere in that 80 to 90% threshold of optimal is more practical. If you get above that, it gets really selfish. And I think that it's not necessarily that helpful. Okay. And so for people listening that maybe, are needing to, like you said, start somewhere, I think the biggest things are the foundational elements. Again, in life, so many of these realities are simple, but simple never means easy, right? Just because something is simple does not mean it's easy to do. So in health, it's the foundational elements of, are you getting enough sleep, right? That's probably number one in my books. If people want to live more healthy lives, you need to get an average of 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night, which in our culture, especially in America, is very countercultural. That's not what's praised, and that's not what's pushed. The reality is, the less sleep, the better for most people in America, because they're high achievers and they think that's what it means to be a high achiever. Right. But that is hurting everything, having negative effects on all aspects of life. And as an athlete, my job was performance, and I saw because I was so aware of it and so focused on it, I saw such a direct correlation to amount of sleep and recovery to performance, not only mentally, but physically, in my touch around the greens, in my ability to pull off shots. It became so clear to me that once you push towards a level of optimization and you reach a certain threshold, you start becoming aware of the ramifications of not doing the things you know you need to do. So sleep what you eat, and then just moving, being more aware of movement and viewing exercise as not only limited to the gym, but all of your life. Those are the foundational elements that can help people start moving in the right direction, because it will be a long process.
And as we circle back to this topic of company culture that is so critical to every organization, one of the best things we probably can do is to start to look at our employees as if they are athletes, just like you are, right? These are people that have to perform and sustain performance for years at your organization. And if you are doing, as leaders of companies, something that is compromising people's ability to stay well, then you're actually, stabbing yourself in the foot. You are doing things that are actually counter to the productivity and performance that you want to create and you want your employees to, execute on. So this is something that we really need to start to pay attention to. Would you agree, Thane? Like, are you seeing that in people as they, are just, we might say normal, they're not athletes, but they are entrepreneurs, they are working, they are employees of major companies, the best ones that are performing and doing well in business or wherever they work, that they are actually also taking care of themselves?
Dude, you're just hitting such a chord with me right now. This is such a big lack of, it's a big black hole where we can really be maximizing so much more of people's potential if we filled it with what the potential is. And what you're talking about is curating environmental wellness. You're seeing some of this happen, but not nearly enough. How can we be more intentional about the whole goal is how can we stack the deck in our favor, right? And like, we want to stack the deck in our favor. We want to help ourselves help ourselves. How do we do that? Well, there's so much power in social proof, in environmental curation, and making these cultural norms around wellness, productivity, and well-being. And there's such an opportunity for companies to leverage that to their advantage to promote not only their people's best health, but also their company's best good. So I think that is such a need. I mean, Kelly Starrett had a great book called Desk Bound, all about how sitting is the new smoking and killing more people than smoking. And he has a lot of good points in there. I think it's just starting the conversation around like, what are the simple changes we can make within company cultures that will have massive compounding benefits for the people working there once they're implemented. And that's a really long conversation, but I think there is a huge need there. So I'm glad that you kind of brought that up.
Yeah. I mean, we see in so much of the research now that this cannot be argued with, right? That our productivity at work is always going to be better if we have employees that have taken care of themselves and are coming to work healthy, fit, and well. And then we see it, it stretches into how much vacation time, into benefits that we're paying, healthcare costs, especially in the United States. You see a ton more of that. Of course, in Canada, we have free healthcare systems, so it's a little bit different, but there's still a lot of cost associated with an employee that has to take a sick leave or a mental health leave because, not like we shouldn't pay that out. It's not that, that's important. We need to support our employees, but we can do so much to prevent that sort of stuff, and it worked well for companies and for individuals. So please, what did you want to
I was just going to say yes and amen.
So good. So the last thing I wanted to touch about, and really the whole point of what I wanted to talk about on today's podcast was, again, not just talking about the big picture company culture, but about the fact that every company is made up of people and individuals, and your expertise is on the individual, on the self-development. And the one thing that is probably one of the most contentious things in our workplaces, and yet still one of the keys to building great workplace culture, is spirituality. And, you're a man of faith, I'm a man of faith, but it doesn't mean that there's a place for it all the time. It's not easy to talk about where you come from, what kind of faith you have, your spirituality. And yet so much of the research says that if you do hide that from yourself or from people around you, and you don't have an avenue to share it, or you feel like you can't practice certain ways. Like, it's been really interesting where I live, just built this incredible new library. And there's actually a place in the library, and it's called the spirituality room. And so there's a washing center for people that are Muslim. There's different things. And I'm like, that is so amazing that even in a library, we're creating space for people to bring such a fundamental part of who they are to that space. And so maybe I would love to just hear from you, maybe if you had an example of somebody that you've worked with that has gone back into their workplace and really come alive about their spirituality. And in turn, it's actually made them better at their job and better at the work that they do. And maybe even if you had a counter example of what's the cost of somebody that doesn't feel like they have a safe space to, be who they really are, which is a spiritual being or some, their spirituality. What does it look like to that person? So I don't know, just maybe be free, but share what you have to think about this.
I love it, man. I think the reality is, if we're honest with ourselves, we all understand that we are spiritual beings. We have a spirit to our nature. And whether or not you have a faith, I think is less of an issue, is more just like recognizing the reality. And it's cool because you see in the culture a lot more spirituality coming into the culture, which has been needed in America. We're very intellectual and we love putting science and data to what we experience, which is helpful. I love it. I think it's super great. But it does also err on eliminating the spiritual side. So it's cool to see kind of a resurgence just culturally. But for me, I think, so the cool thing is with the book coming out and just speaking more and being more of a voice, I've been really enjoying my approach to it is to say, look, like if you're going to understand me and who I am and what I have to say, you have to understand the worldview that I operate from and this big component of my life, which is my faith. That is my life. And so just as much as when I read books from people who maybe come from a different background or a different perspective, they often infuse that in their writing. That's where I come from with mine, is I infuse my faith into my writing because it's who I am. And I think that's the integration you're talking about, is how can we be an integrated human where all aspects of our life are aligned into who we are at our core and what we believe at our core. And when you stifle that, like you said, you start creating a gap, and in that gap creates more tension. And in that tension, when it's left over time, can produce greater conflict than otherwise. Because look, like you believe what you believe to be true because you believe it to be true, just as much as I believe what I believe to be true because I believe it's true. So, okay, if we can recognize that, whether or not it's the same or different, if we can recognize that as a starting point, then we can have a conversation and say, look, I want to hear what you believe because maybe it's different than what I believe. And I want you to hear what I believe, and that's a conversation. And that's always harder than saying, I'm right, you're wrong. Right. So we love, just like, there's a great quote. I can't remember who it was by, but he said that when presented with an opportunity to prove our point or change our mind on an issue, we always get busy with the burden of proof. And it's so true, right? Our natural response, again, is going to be, okay, how can I prove my point and prove them wrong? That's our natural response versus entertaining the reality that you may be wrong or that you maybe should change. And again, you don't need to change your mind, but at least you have to allow yourself the opportunity to think that they have a chance at being right, to actually hear them. Right. And so that's a level of like emotional and intellectual intelligence that's hard to reach for because it's more uncomfortable. Yeah. And some people, it takes time to develop that. And so it's a hard thing. I think if we can just develop more care and compassion and empathy for each other and understanding that we all think we're right, and that none of us are God. Like no one is God. We're all human. So I think that can help us humble ourselves and be like, look, I only have partial knowledge. You only have partial knowledge because we're not God. And let's have a conversation, and incorporate that. So I think that's important. And then on the second question on workplace environment, I think that I think it's really cool when people make space, like you said, to be real and recognize that. And like we mentioned before, empowering others and encouraging others in and supporting others in those ways is really life-giving. And that's really what love is. Love is selfless. It's preferring the other. And it's saying that, again, I may disagree with what you believe, but that doesn't mean I can't love you, right? I can still love you as a human being. And what I believe from God's word in the Bible. And what he says is that all humans are two things. We're created one in the image of God, which means we have inherent worth and value that no one can take away. It doesn't matter who you are, where you live, what you look like, what you do, what the labels we put on you are. At your fundamental core, you're a human, which means you have divine inherent worth that no other human can take away. And second is that we're all sinners. That means no one's better than the rest. We all miss the mark. We all fall short, right? And so because of that, it puts every single human on the same playing field, on the same even plane. And if we can cut away from all this stuff that we put on top of that and see each other for those two realities, that's how we can best love each other, whatever the situation is.
Just to even wrap up, if you could give, again, like the audience that's listening to this is these executives who are super passionate about workplace culture. What's one thing that you're seeing that really changes the game for them and really could be their sort of ticket to, just leveling up that one little bit in their culture and their workplace? And again, from a millennial perspective, like what are you wanting to see in the workplace of the future that isn't there right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I think the challenge of today's society is that it's the age of information and everything is out for everyone to see and have. And so I think growing up in that, our generation, the generation to come, when things aren't clear or when they're hidden, it's going to be disengaging and it's going to hurt our forward progress or our motivation. So just recognizing the current reality and just being more honest and open and transparent and communicative to start conversations. I think that's a big part of just who we are as a generation. And I think the other side of it is to think less about the negatives and more about the positives. How can we empower the generation based on who they are, not change who they are based on how they've been raised or grown up? So we have a lot of unique challenges with the time that we've lived in, just with the invention of smartphones, and having those from a young age it carries a lot of negative ramifications with it. Having Wi-Fi everywhere, having screens, having all these things that were never in society before isn't our generation's fault, but it has played a massive role in it. So how can we not just look at the negative aspects of that and try to change them, but how can we recognize and then replace that with empowering into a new reality based on where they come from, not removing it, but using it to leverage it to our advantage. And I think that it takes more of a positive affirmation versus a negative affirmation. And so thinking about it from a positive light, how can we understand them based on who they are and how they've grown up? And then how can we use who they are to better support who they can be and who they can become within our company, and taking that stewarding that role well as a human being, I think. So,
man, that's absolutely brilliant. And it even touches on a recent interview I did with Rachel Milkey, who is leading this incredible organization, Hilberg and Burke, and actually took the time last year to have a one-on-one with every one of her over 200 employees. And this is not feasible for every leader, but it is feasible to some degree. You lead, whether it's maybe portioning it out and having other leaders do one-on-ones, but really we've talked throughout this whole interview today with Thane about the importance of knowing your people as individuals, who they are, what they bring to the table, what makes them tick, what gets them excited, what their faith and spirituality looks like, what they do outside of work, who they are is so fundamental to us building great culture. Because unless we can, again, like Thane talked about, find that alignment with who they are and who our company is, then that's the only way we can move forward and go kind of from glory to glory where we need to go. The ship that we're steering won't get to where it's supposed to go unless there's alignment. So Thane, thank you so much for your incredible insights today. I so appreciate what you bring to the table and what you're doing to really help people where they're at become something a little bit better. Please, whoever's listening to this, go check out Thane's new book, From Here to There. It's incredible, and you will be a better person just by reading it. So Any final words of wisdom, Thane?
Thanks, man. I appreciate those kind of words. And I actually have one quote that came to mind. It was, I can't remember. I think his name is Diego Simula. Yeah, Diego Simula. He said that forward progress is not a finished process.
Ooh.
And I think that's a good thing to kind of close on. And that, look, forward progress is the goal, but it's never a finished process. So we must fall in love with the process and keep pressing forward.
I really trust this guy. I really believe in him, and I believe that he has a message that we all can pull from. That when we walk into our companies, wherever we are, that we have a part to play. We have a responsibility to be part of the change, part of the solution that we want to see in our workplaces, right? Whether it's that we're frustrated with something that our boss does, or whether we want to see the culture be better, we can be part of making that happen. And Thane really gives some practical advice on how to do that and how to be an individual player. You've been hanging out with me today, Tyne and Alan. Make sure that you follow us on all of wherever you listen to podcasts, and also just stay connected. Leave any comments, feedback. I always want to hear from you. You're just becoming an amazing audience, and I'm loving hearing from you so far. So make sure you find us on culturing.com. So we'll leave it there. Be blessed and have an amazing day.